I was so mad at my friend Steve I could scream. For more than a half hour, we engaged in a heated argument over government politics. In a matter of minutes, we were both fighting like 6-year-olds over and over, screaming at the top of our lungs, our voices climaxing into a full-fledged verbal war with no end in sight. Our exchange of words and use of language became harsh, so harsh that the argument became personal, with insults flying in every direction. Our anger began to fuel up like a fireball, our eyes now filled with hate towards each other. I could now feel my spirit being destroyed as I began to tire of an argument that was not going to be resolved. I looked over at Steve with fire in my eyes and told him how much I hated him and that our lifelong friendship was now over, that I no longer cared to be a part of his life, and that we needed to part ways before we engaged in an all-out physical war. I felt like I had blood in my hands. I wanted to strangle him, maybe even kill him, but somehow I felt it best that I walk away from him forever and never look back. 2 days would pass by since the argument, and I had finally cooled off. It was a cold, early morning in March, and I was approaching a Tim Hortons to grab a tea. As I entered, there was Steve sitting alone at a table by himself, our eyes locked with one another, and he stared at me as though he had been waiting for me. He then motioned me to sit across from him at the table. We continued to stare at each other, and although we didn't speak at first, it was as though I could read his thoughts. Out of the blue, he grabbed my hand in a firm grip with a sudden look of sorrow in his face. I then looked over at him and apologized to him for everything, for all the things I had said during our argument 2 days ago, and what an awful friend I had been. He then let go of my hand and began to smile. It was the broadest smile I had ever seen on him because, in all the years I'd known him, he was not what I would consider a person who expressed extreme emotion. He didn't have to say anything to me. He didn't need to. The expression on his face told me all I needed to know, that I was forgiven, that our friendship could move forward, new beginnings, no more fighting and no more hateful insults. We stayed for another hour at the coffee shop, finished our drinks, and then went our separate ways. As I walked home, I felt a weird, sudden sensation, a sudden sadness that took over me that I couldn't explain. I somehow had the feeling that even though Steve and I resolved our differences through a petty argument, no less, something didn't feel right. I felt a sudden disconnect, a feeling of abandonment, the feeling that our parting of ways was final. And then I thought for a moment, and I knew somehow. And as I quickly raced home, there was my next-door neighbor waiting for me with tears in her eyes. I didn't have to ask her what was wrong. I knew it. I felt it. And then she told me. Steve was dead. He had committed suicide 2 days ago, only moments after our argument.